I was actually hired by a gentleman named Mark Wozniak, who at the time was working as a consultant for Sony Corporation and developing a concept which at that time had no name. We had a secret code name for it called PSX. Sony had achieved a relationship with a company called Nintendo, who we all know well. Nintendo was wanting to add a CD-ROM feature to the existing Nintendo platform, and that was essentially going to be called the Super Nintendo. At the very last minute, when Sony and Nintendo were about to announce the relationship, Nintendo essentially pulled out of the deal. Ken Kutaragi, who was the Oracle, as we all called him, the man who really spurred on the vision of PlayStation, invented it from the ground up. He was very upset when Nintendo pulled out of the original deal. Ken did, put his hand on the table and emphatically declare in Japanese that we were going to, essentially bury Nintendo. And Sony, having already spent a lot of time and a great deal of money and effort to build this CD-ROM attachment to the Nintendo, decided to take what it had learned and develop the PlayStation. Nobody really understood at the time, I think, the significance of the kind of state change between 2D video games and 3D video games. And the Sony PlayStation was built around 3D gaming. We were challenged to kind of create this new form of content, which was completely 3D. Not that I could predict the future, but I really felt like, Sony had the wherewithal to pull it off. The development cycle was very, very quick. From initial concept to product delivery was about 6 months for the PlayStation as an architecture. And that was at the time pretty revolutionary. Very much just-in-time engineering. I had seen at that time a prototype of the PlayStation, which was about as big as a Xerox machine. And it looked a little bit like a Xerox machine. People finally believed that it was possible to do these kinds of graphics and have that kind of audio quality on a platform, this small. Before then, before we had this physical unit, people were always asking, well, yeah, okay, so you can do it in a box this big, but can you do it in a box this big? And when we finally had that box to show and showed the same demonstration software, people were sold. Because of 3DO's lack of success, we had to overcome the fact that, oh, you're just another 3DO, or you're just like all the systems that had come before that had failed. What does Sony know about video gaming? Now today that seems completely ridiculous. When we were trying to sell it as a product to publishers, to game developers, it was very difficult for us to overcome the success of Sega, the success of Nintendo. We had to really do a lot to convince developers that we were different in some way. If we could convince those people that our platform was the best platform to work on, that we really did have a good idea about how games would behave in the future, and that 3D was the way to go, then those same developers would not be creating games for Sega, would not be creating games for Nintendo. And that was really the strategy that succeeded. When the PlayStation came out, Steve Race was designated as the keynote speaker for that year's very first E3. Everybody was really prepared and anxious to listen in and see what Steve would have to say to kind of kick off the first E3 and to understand more about the PlayStation and what it was going to do in the American market. And Steve came out very, famously and had some papers and put them down on the podium. And in one moment that I'll never forget, he shouted out to the audience, $2.99, and then left his papers on the podium and walked off the stage. It was a challenge for Sony to meet that price point. Nobody had ever quite done it that way before, selling the base unit, the platform at a loss, hoping to recoup. And I say hoping to recoup all of the expense and the R&D for developing a piece of hardware by the third-party licensing fees that are charged to publishing companies. That was a completely new business model. Steve and ultimately Ken Kutaragi and Terry Toganaka took a huge risk in allowing the price point to be at that level. Hindsight's 20/20, so I think they made a good bet.